started woodworking, I had a Craftsman 6-inch jointer and a Ryobi lunchbox planer, and they were great. They did a ton of work for me, but sometimes I would need something to be flattened that was wider than 6 inches. And in this project, we definitely need that for our panels, which are just about 12 inches wide when we first start to thickness plane and mill them up and all that fun stuff. So what I have here is a jig that we're going to build now. The jig is a piece of 3/4 inch Baltic birch plywood, and it's as flat as can be. You got to make sure you get a nice flat piece of 3/4 inch Baltic birch plywood. Mine's cut just 1/8 of an inch less than the width of my bed, which is 12 inches. So you want to cut it just a little bit less in width than the bed of your planer. And lengthwise, well, I did mine at 36 inches. You can do a couple of these if you wanted to, one for wide stock and then one for long stock, and one for stock that's not as long. And we're going to cut some, you need to cut some wedges as well to help support stuff. And we're going to make these nice little blocks here. These blocks are really cool because they slide into these grooves that we're going to make. We're going to take a 1/4 inch router bit and get rid of a whole bunch of waste, and then come back in with a dovetail bit and create dovetails in here. Make these guys with matching dovetails that'll slide down the length of the board, allowing us to flatten a board that is as long as this piece or shorter. And then we're going to screw these guys into the board and into the piece. First thing we need to do is we're going to mark on our board locations where we're going to put dovetails. I have a larger square set at just about 6 inches, and I'm going to come and make a mark. So this mark here is going to roughly be the center of our board. The next thing we want to do is make a series of marks. So we got to figure that whatever we put in here is going to be, probably centered in the board. So what we want to do is have pieces that are to the right and left of it, as well as farther out to hold a variety of sizes of parts. So I'm going to come here with my square and just mark in something that is 2 inches over in each direction. And then again, another 2 inches in the next, 2 inches out from those. So I have 4 marks here. And I'm going to then just bring these marks across a little bit. Just enough to tell me that these are the marks I'm going to cut on the router table. And then I'll turn the board around, and I need to bring these marks down. Here at the router table, I have my 1/4 inch bit set into my router, and it's protruding above the surface by a little bit less than 1/2 inch. And what I'm going to do is I got my fence lined up so that when I take my first pass, the bit is lined up with one of my black marks, and on the outside, I'm going to run the piece all the way through, reset my fence for the next mark, which will be 2 inches from the first, make that pass, go 4 inches, make the third pass, and another 2 inches, and make the fourth pass. And I got my 4 grooves. I then changed the bit to my dovetail bit and have set the height of the dovetail bit to the depth of the grooves, or maybe just a little bit more, but not less. And now I'm going to run this board through again, and every 2 inches, skipping the center, the 4 inches, cut a dovetail all the way through all 4 grooves. Now that the grooves are cut in the plywood, what I'm going to do is take this piece, this 3/4 inch wide piece that was a leftover from one of my rails, or offcut, and I have set my fence so that the bit is mainly buried in the fence. And I'm going to run this piece through in one direction, turn around and run it in the other direction. And as I do that, I'll keep working until I get a nice fit into my dovetails. So at the router table, I finished making my dovetail, and it fits really well. I want a little bit of play. I want it to be able to slide, right, back and forth. Because what we want to do is next we're going to lay out a piece here, a couple pieces we're going to cut. But we want this to be able to slide along the length of all of these different rails that we dovetailed in. So we're going to end up, we have two screws here. One is 1 inch long and the other is 1.25 inches. The 1.25 inch one will be used to screw into the board itself, the Baltic birch plywood, and the 1 inch long screw will be used to screw into the actual piece that we're going to be holding down. So the first thing we need to do is figure out what kind of clearances we need. So we don't need to go too deep here, just deep enough to hold this piece down. And I would say that's probably deep enough right here. So I'm going to take my square, find where that is, and mark a line. Now that's for the 1.25 inch screw. The 1 inch screw is going to just lightly protrude through the piece itself and then screw into the piece that we want to flatten. So we just want to go into it just a little bit, just enough to hold it. So I'm going to say right about here. So I'm going to take my square, set that for the new distance, lock it down. So that's a 1/2 inch. Let me just write that here, 1/2 inch, so I don't forget. So what we need to do is we're going to create a piece that has a top. We'll cut this off, but it's going to have a screw down below and a screw out. So the next thing we're going to do is figure out the length of this piece. So if I'm going to put a screw, say right here, and I'm going to put a screw around here, I need some room on top, obviously. Right about here. So that's about 1 inch above the bottom of the dovetail. Let's do a little bit shorter. I think 1.5 inches would work just fine. So 1.5 inches. I'll bring that down. So I'm going to go over to the bandsaw and cut this out, bring it over, and we'll take a look at it. I have some little marks made on my pieces here for where I'm going to drill. So basically I'm just shooting for the center of the vertical and the center of the horizontal. Let me show you. So I got one for the vertical and one for the horizontal. I have an 1/8 inch bit in here to drill my clearance hole for the screws, and I'm just going to drill these holes now. Okay, I threaded my pieces with my screws, and actually the 1.25 inches was a little bit too long, so I did 1 inch for both the horizontal and the vertical screw. So both of these now are 1 inch screws, not 1.25 inches for the vertical. This is a perfect example of how to use this jig. So here is a 12-inch wide or just under 12-inch wide, yeah, just under, piece that may be potentially the panel in your Gamble House living room armchair. And it's got some really nice cathedral grain pattern here, but it is not by any means flat. It wobbles on both sides. Now the problem with this piece is that when you put it on top of our 3/4 inch Baltic birch plywood, our little guys we made are higher than it. Well, what you do is you grab some 1/2 inch Baltic birch plywood or anything else you have, and you just set it down on your board and you raise your piece up. As you can see, when I slide this guy up, the board is now above the top of this piece. However, before, the board was below, and we have the possibility of, one, we're definitely going to plane into our pieces and maybe in the middle, and that's not what you want. So instead, what we do is grab something to lift this up. So I'm going to grab some 1/2 inch Baltic birch plywood, put it on underneath, and what's nice about this piece too is it shows you that we can deal with irregular shapes. So we have got a curve up here, we got a curve here. So you take your piece, your little guy, you slide it in, and the first thing you want to do when you slide it in is you want to tighten the back screw first. And then you tighten the next screw. And you get that secure into the board. And you just go around all 4 corners that way. Not going anywhere. Before we head over to the planer and we flatten the side, you do want to do one more thing. You want to grab a can of paste wax and flip this guy over, make sure it's clear of any debris, and put a nice coat of paste wax along the entire piece. Okay, I got my combo machine in planer mode right now, and I set the bed height, and I'm probably just a little bit too low, so I should miss this piece entirely on my first pass, but then I'll crank it a little bit down and start taking light passes off. Just took the board off our platform, and we're in really good shape. We got a little bit of snipe in the front. We've lost about 1 inch in the front and 1 inch in the back, but the rest of the board is really flat. And that inch you lost in the front, well, you're going to lose some room anyways because we got the screws coming in to the board to hold everything down. This is the side we ran through the joint planer, and when I take the board on top of my table saw and I lift it, I've got that suction that you get when you have a nice flat board. I want to talk about a couple of other things real quick. Number one, when this board is laying down, like it was here, you need to make sure you support the board along its entire length. So for starters, that's number one. Number two, you may also want to make some wedges if you have more of an irregular board, because you don't want the board to be able to move at all here. So if you've screwed this down and you have a board that is moving still because there's not enough support or there's a gap between the board and whatever you've raised it up with, then grab some wedges and just put the wedges inside and support the board around all of its entire length. So that's for doing this on a thin board. When you're doing this on something thicker, it's a little bit easier. You don't have to support it and bring it up. Let's take a look at that. So for this piece of walnut, I'm bringing my guys over and I'm taking a look at the board, and here it's rocking in this corner, here a little bit. So this corner over here needs to be supported. In order to support that corner, and I'm going to place a wedge underneath here, just a little bit, in this corner too. And then I got some gaps here in the center. Just on this side. Okay, so now I can lock down my ends. And I got a new height for the bed set up. And let's start to plane this board and get this guy flat. Here's what the board looks like. I wasn't really worried about this because if we flip it over and we flatten the other side and then come back around to get our final thickness, we'll get rid of this. It's not a big deal. So, truth. Here's where the rubber meets the road. Let's see. Oh yeah. I don't know if you guys can see it or not, but it's there. We are flat. You know when you're flat, when you pull it up, you feel that air suction, and we are there. Yeah. Yeah, that's really nice. So, this guy's much wider than 6 inches. It's actually 9 inches wide, and it's nice and flat. The positive here is you can flatten something that's wider than your jointer. However, you do need to make sure that the piece has a little bit of extra length on both the front and the back that you'll be able to get rid of later. So it's going to cost you a little bit more in wood, but it's going to save you from having to go out and buy a really big jointer. How much are you going to lose in wood? It'd be fair to say between 1 and 2 inches, most likely more like 2 inches on each side. So you're going to lose about 4 inches on the piece. It's sad, but true. There's just snipe that happens with this jig. I've got my planer set up so I don't get snipe when I'm using it normally. No snipe whatsoever, but with the jig, I get snipe. It's just part of the game.